My name is Alex Vines. I'm the director of the Africa program here at the Institute, and I'm delighted to be the host this evening to Right Honourable Femi Gbajabiamila, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of Nigeria. And this meeting, obviously, is in the run-up to the national elections in Nigeria in February next year, marking the end of President Muhammadu Buhari's second term in office. A process that we ourselves have been very familiar with, including President Buhari when he was presidential candidate for his first term, speaking here at this institute, well known in Nigeria. The recently introduced Electoral Act 2022 includes reforms focused on the country's independent National Electoral Commission, the conduct of party primaries, and the inclusivity of electoral processes and the use of electronic technology in voting procedures and transmission of results. However, the scope of security, fiscal and governance challenges entwined with civil fatigue and low levels of trust and voter mobilization, particularly among youth, reflects deep-rooted issues with significant implications for the elections requiring broader socio-political change. At this event, we're hopeful that the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honourable Femi, will discuss the main headways and remaining challenges of implementing that Electoral Act, the role of the Nigerian National Assembly also in strengthening state-society relations, and also the priorities for promoting greater civic trust and engagement in the process and outcome of the 2023 elections next year in February. I'd like to just note that this is the first of a series of events and outputs examining Nigeria's elections that we're going to be doing at Chatham House. So this is really the icebreaker, starting out a series of consultations and public meetings that Chatham House is going to embark on that pathway to February 2023. A couple of reminders. First of all, those of you who are with us on Zoom and live stream, you're very welcome. We're delighted you can join us today. We know we have an international audience from all over the world, not just Nigeria, many hundreds of you. My apologies that you won't be able to, through the live stream function, provide questions to the speaker. But if you are on the Zoom platform, you are able to use the Q&A function throughout the event to submit questions. Please do specify who you are and write your question, and we will try and draw you in, some of your questions, into the Q&A session. Finally, we are at Chatham House, but this is not under the Chatham House rule. This is a public event. The press are here. There's photographs being taken. It's live streamed. So everything that is said in this room can be reported. If you do use social media, we'd be grateful if you use the hashtag Chatham House Africa. It's a way of kind of reaching out to more broad audiences. So with no more ado, I want to again welcome the Right Honourable Femi Gbajabiamila, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of Nigeria. He served as a principal officer for 12 of his 19 years in the House of Representatives, and he remains one of the longest-serving members of Parliament. He is no better place than anybody else to talk about the requirements, challenges, and opportunities that Nigeria has now as it prepares for its 2023 elections. So I want to, Right Honourable Speaker, offer you the podium and again welcome you to Chatham House. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Alex. Very quickly, the name is Gbajabiamila. Well, the short, to make it easier for you and for many others, so don't worry about it. We have this issue everywhere. Just call me Gbaja. Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Royal Institute of International Affairs has, in the over a century of its existence, informed the United Kingdom's understanding of issues beyond its borders, and consequently has extended significant influence over the content and implementation of UK's foreign policy. The Institute continues to provide a unique and influential platform for informed discussions of issues and debate of ideas that impact the world. I saw the thousands, and you said it was about 10,000 names on the walls as I was coming in. And I'm therefore delighted to be here today to join the list of distinguished persons who have, over the last century, contributed ideas and principles that have shaped our world and influenced the course of history. In a few months, the people of Nigeria will go to the polls to elect a new president and a new vice president. They will elect 109 senators and 360 members of the House of Representatives. We will also further elect governors and their deputies in 29 states of the Federation, because that election is staggered. Even though we have 36 states, but we're going to be conducting elections right now in 29 states of the Federation, and thousands of state legislators. This is an enormous logistical endeavor under the best of conditions. But in this instance, this most essential democratic requirement is significantly complicated by the treacherous security conditions across the country. And we'll come back to that subject later on. Elections in Nigeria are governed primarily by two legal instruments: the Constitution of the Federal Republic and the Electoral Act. The Independent National Electoral Commission, that is the umpire, established by the Constitution to oversee all elections in the country, except elections, of course, into offices in the local government, is also empowered by the Constitution and the Electoral Act to make specific regulations that have the power of law. So if I may walk that back a little bit, you can actually argue that there are three instruments: the Constitution, the Electoral Act, and the INEC regulations. Now, since 1999, when Nigeria returned to democratic governance, we have held national elections every 4 years. We have confronted new problems with each election cycle and have tried to address these problems through legislation, regulations, innovation, and practice. Now, truth be told, elections in Nigeria today are far removed from what they were in 1999, in 2003, in 2007, or even in 2011. They keep getting better and better. That is not to suggest perfection. We're not even close. But there is evident progress from which we have learned lessons that will continue to guide our collective efforts to improve the process. I say collective effort because in every area where we have made progress in the bid to ensure free and fair elections, such progress has come from the efforts of a diverse group. After every election cycle, the National Assembly has initiated steps to document experiences, extrapolate lessons learned, and on that basis, amend the electoral laws to plug gaps and remove bottlenecks. Now, let us bear in mind that, for me, I don't think elections are perfect anywhere in the world. Even in the most advanced of democracies, we're all too familiar with the hanging Chad issue in Florida during the Gore versus Bush elections. And even more recently, and still haunting the United States today, is the issue of whether or not, or how free and fair the elections were during the Trump, a couple of years ago. So that is to say that elections are not perfect, but we must aim at near perfection. Now, each electoral amendment effort reflects a considered attempt to provide a more robust statutory framework for elections, from the internal party processes to the final declaration of results, and even pre- and post-litigation. At the same time, the Independent National Electoral Commission has, in the last decade, shown a remarkable willingness to learn from its own mistakes, embrace new technology, proactive action, engage stakeholders, and take proactive action to ensure public faith in the electioneering process. They, and indeed the legislature, have often been helped in our joint efforts by aid and support from our international friends who understand that Nigeria's democracy has been hard-won and deserves to be protected by all prudent and necessary means. Now, in February of this year, after months of commitment, the National Assembly painstakingly concluded work on a new Electoral Act, which is now being signed into law by His Excellency, the President of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR. The Electoral Act 2022 is a joint effort by the legislature and executive, working with all stakeholders to drastically improve our election process and drawing from lessons learned from our own elections and the experiences of other nations. Over time, and through practice and experience, we have identified the pillars that make for a free and fair election process. Now, these pillars have been strengthened by this new law. We have sought to use technology to plug gaps around the troublesome issue of voter accreditation, transmission and collation of election results, and so many other things. We expect that the impact will be felt in the forthcoming general elections. The most important pillar for a free and fair election process is the voters' register. This list is the basis for pre-election accreditation of voters to ensure that the persons who turn up to vote are eligible to do so. In this new electoral amendment, we have made provisions to allow for biometric accreditation of voters. Now, put simply, nobody who is eligible and previously registered, or who isn't eligible and who hasn't been previously registered, will vote in the next general elections. Now, this is fundamental. In addition, we have provided for electronic transmission of accreditation data. What this does is that it addresses the problem of ballot stuffing, all too familiar to many of us. If the number of voters cast in a polling unit exceeds the number of voters accredited in that unit, the election will be nullified, pure and simple. After concluding balloting in the polling units and counting and entering votes into the result sheets, the Independent National Electoral Commission may now transmit those results electronically in real time. Now, these results may be viewed by election monitors, observers, and citizens. The intention is to preclude manipulation of the physical results sheets and leaving the polling units and before the final results have been collated and announced. Suppose the physical, and that's a question that I get all the time. Suppose the physical results sheet from the collation center does not correlate to the electronic data transmitted from the polling location. What it means is that will be prima facie evidence of manipulation, sufficient to nullify the results from that location. Now, as part of our efforts to amend the Electoral Act, we considered provisions to mandate electronic voting. We considered putting that in the law. Those provisions were ultimately rejected. Now, it's important I bring this up because many people conflate or mix up the difference between electronic voting and electronic transmission. Whereas one is the actual vote, the other is actually transmitting what has already been voted. But it was rejected because it would have been impracticable to implement at scale. Bear in mind, from my research, I also found out that there's so very, very few countries around the world, particularly in Europe, that actually practice or do or get involved in electronic voting. Yes, they do electronic transmission, but hardly do you find in Europe countries that do electronic voting. And perhaps maybe only in America, if you want to count the advanced democracies around the world. There are a couple of countries actually, I believe if I'm correct, Switzerland, I'm not quite sure, in Europe that actually tried electronic voting. It was a disaster. And in their next election, they reverted back to manual voting. Now, of particular importance to us was how to ensure the security and credibility of votes. It became apparent that the best way to do that would be to implement a two-stage voting system wherein the electronic ballots are validated by paper ballots that can be audited. This needed to be done if we were to include electronic voting. Now, this would have been an unnecessary, cumbersome, and expensive addition that did not offer commensurate value. We chose to focus instead on those amendments that showed the best promise of measurable improvements to the process. One of such amendments intended to improve the internal democracy of the political parties by mandating political parties to nominate candidates for election through direct primary elections that allowed all party members to be part of the decision-making process. After all, the textbook and dictionary definition of democracy is government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Not of a few, but by a few, for a few. In the House of Representatives, we believe that a nomination process that concentrated decision-making power in the hands of a few party leaders and delegates is fundamentally flawed, undemocratic, and prone to bad outcomes. We had hoped that by including a direct primary mandate in the law, we would cause political parties to invest in building their infrastructure and strengthening their internal processes. One of the arguments at the time I was inundated with was that, for those who were anti-direct primaries, was that the parties do not have credible registers of their members. And I argued extensively then that you cannot, because, you've been in existence for years, and cannot say because you failed in what you're supposed to do, now truncate the ideals and the principles of democracy because of your failure. And I was convinced that if that law was, if that provision was of direct primaries was in the law, within a week, 2 weeks, the parties would have their registers. After all, you have artisan associations, teachers associations, mechanics associations, vulcanizers associations. They all have credible registers. How much more a political party established to usher in democracy? Unfortunately, that provision did not have the political support required to sustain it. I do expect and I hope that we will return to this someday and perhaps get it right at that time. Another area of particular interest was the issue of diaspora voting. Now, this is a hot-button topic or issue. The Nigerian population in the diaspora constitute a critical demographic. They contribute billions of dollars to the economy yearly and are often involved in the cultural, religious, and political life of their communities back at home. Since our return to democracy, many Nigerians who lived and worked in the diaspora, myself included, have returned home to work in the public service and private industry, bringing their wealth of experience and unique perspective. Whilst many voices across the political spectrum believe that giving Nigerians in the diaspora a vote and the ability to participate in the electoral process is a worthy objective, the practical implementation of such a proposal remains a significant obstacle for which there aren't any easy answers. In the House of Representatives, we are working with various stakeholders to figure out the issues around actual implementation. When we are confident that we have the answers, we will pursue constitutional amendments required to make diaspora voting possible. I must also add here that a lot of people also are of the opinion, or mistaken opinion, that to enable diaspora voting, it's a question of just basically enacting a law. But that is not the case. Diaspora voting has to come through a constitutional amendment. And there's a major difference between constitutional amendment and enacting simply a law in the National Assembly. One is more laborious and more extensive and takes a lot of time, whereas the other begins and ends in the National Assembly. The other one, the constitutional amendment, has to go to even the subnationals and get 2/3 approval from the states. So balloting and collation are two potentially problematic areas of our election process. This still require attention and a coordinated effort to plan and implement strategies to prevent worst-case outcomes. Now, the problem here is not of law or regulation, but relates specifically to the ongoing national security challenges in the country, and I did say we'll come back to that. Balloting, the actual process of voting and counting votes, and the collation of results in various central locations across the country are both uniquely vulnerable to disruption by terrorists, secessionists, agitators, bandits, and bad actors of all types. As some of you may know, Nigeria is currently confronting significant and evolving national security challenges. We are still engaged in a confrontation with insurgents in the Northeast who have for nearly 2 decades sought to take over territory in the country and remake parts of our nation in the image of their discredited theocracy. In the Northwest, and increasingly in the North-Central regions of our country, a combination of attacks by Islamic State affiliates and armed bandits who kill and maim to terrorize and kidnap for profit has made life very difficult for our fellow citizens. Separatist agitators have become unapologetic purveyors of violence against state security agencies and ordinary citizens in the southern regions. Men and women of the Nigerian security and military agencies are engaged in all of these theaters, either trying to prevent incidents, repel attacks, or rescue kidnapped victims. The government continues to invest scarce resources to address these national security challenges. Still, you must understand that the sheer multiplicity of the threats has stretched the available personnel and material to near limits. Now, this is the context in which we are preparing to hold general elections in a few months. To my mind, the question of how to secure voters, polling officials, and materials in 176,846 polling units in 774 local governments across 36 states. Amid these multiple and varied security challenges is the great unanswered question of the 2023 general elections. And it is not a rhetorical question or a matter of theoretic considerations. Just last week, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, officials of the INEC on an exercise to register voters, I believe it was in Imo State, somewhere in the southeast region of the country, were attacked and one was killed by alleged secessionist agitators. The assailants recorded the attack on video, wherein they expressed their grouse with the voter registration exercise and declared that there will be no elections in the region. Already we have begun in government to make concerted efforts to prepare for the challenges posed by this unfortunate reality. In the 2022 Appropriations Bill, the legislature has made provisions to allow both the Independent National Electoral Commission and the security agencies to make adequate plans for these contingencies. And I am aware that in addition to funding issues, efforts are already underway to prepare for the unique challenges we face as we plan to deliver free, fair, and credible elections across the country. Now the question is, will this be enough? I sincerely hope so. However, the truth of the matter is that we are confronted with Donald Rumsfeld's logic of unknown unknowns. In February of 2002, the then United States Secretary of Defense, responding to a reporter's question, postulated that there are known knowns, and these are things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. And that is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But he went further to say, but that there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know that we don't know. Now, all our planning and preparations are based on the things we know and areas where we recognize that there are gaps in our knowledge, to our knowledge. The unknown unknowns present the most danger and for which we are the least prepared. One area of concern where we can work together to improve outcomes is the issue of voter apathy and voter participation. We have about 84 million registered voters, thereabouts, in the country. About 28 million of those voters participated in the last presidential election in the country, and that represents about a 35% rate of participation. The numbers are significantly much worse in down-ballot elections. When voters don't participate in sufficient numbers in electing their representatives and their government, it suggests a dangerous lack of faith in the political process. It sets the stage for people to consider other often undemocratic alternatives, and we cannot afford this. We are all still uniquely vulnerable to democratic reversals, as seen with the recent litany of coups across the continent. Parliamentary democracy is only beginning to take root in the African continent. Voter education and enlightenment campaigns can help increase the rate of voter participation, getting more people to believe that there is power in the vote and that a ballot can change the course of a nation and improve the conditions of people. Enhancing citizen participation is also about ensuring that the nation's diversity is reflected in the composition of its political actors. The variety of voices, perspectives, and experiences can only improve the quality of debate and enhance the quality of outcomes. More importantly, we need more young people and women and more people living with disabilities. Now, that represents the true rainbow coalition, if I may say, of the Nigerian character. Now, to achieve this objective, we need to, amongst other things, figure out the prohibitively expensive costs of elections in Nigeria. Elections are costly in Nigeria for several reasons. First, our people have expectations of politicians, those who hold political office and those who aspire to do so. The expectations are so high. These expectations almost always revolve around money. Secondly, for political parties, the sale of nomination forms is vital for operational revenue. Additionally, political parties use the high cost of nomination forms to screen candidates and reduce the practice of aspirants playing spoiler or using the process as an opportunity to negotiate their personal ambitions. Clearly, we need to reform our campaign finance laws and the entire system through which we fund politics and political operations in the country. This will require amendments to both the Constitution and the Electoral Act. To be effective, such campaign finance reform legislation will impose a financial reporting mandate on candidates and campaigns and impose several penalties on violators. Now, let's be clear. This may very well help clean up the flow of money into the political process. But there's a real risk and danger that this ends up making the process even more expensive by creating regulatory compliance costs. So as we consider this option, we will consider others and remain open to new ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy in Nigeria is young and fragile. I can't say that enough. Sustaining it requires dedicated effort. This is a defining moment. The attention of Europe and the rest of the West is now rightly focused on the situation in Ukraine and the righteous effort to stop the forces of creeping totalitarianism on the European continent. However, you must understand that over the next year, the people of Nigeria will also be involved in a noble effort to sustain a hard-won democracy. The success or failure of this effort will impact on the Nigerian people, all of Africa, and indeed the rest of the world. Therefore, I urge you not to look away. We have it in our power as citizens and leaders, partners in the Community of Nations, to decide that we will work together to protect democracy in Nigeria and Africa. So let us do so together and ensure that the next phase of history is one of peace and shared prosperity for all our peoples. I thank you once more for inviting me to address you today in this place of consequential conversation and transformative ideas. I am hopeful that the conversations we hold will translate to fruitful and beneficial action for us in Nigeria and for the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we now have 30 minutes for an opportunity for a conversation. And what I'm going to do is do a mixture of gathering questions from yourselves here in the audience physically, but also we're having many questions coming in online. So I'll do various rounds. First of all, we'll come to you here, and there's already a hand up here. So what I'll do is one in every block down here first. So I'll get a cluster of 4, and then we'll come back to the honourable speaker. So you, sir, right there in the front.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself and be succinct so we get plenty of time.
Dr. Dayo Olomu, London. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dayo Olomu. I live in London. It is about the diaspora voting. In the House of Rep, during the last voting, 58 members of House of Rep voted for yes, and 240 voted for no. And we spent about 20 years pursuing the diaspora voting. From your experience, what 3 practical things do you think Nigerians in diaspora can do to ensure that the next time we present the bill, we are able to sail it through? Just 3 practical things that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Gentleman there. Yes, you, sir.
Firstly, I would like to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your time and insights tonight. My name is Sina Alamuti. I'm a cybersecurity consultant and a member of the House. My question to you is referring to your mention of digital voting systems. I'm interested to know what are the precautions taken to protect these systems from a cybersecurity perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking, there are, it's all gentlemen asking questions at the moment. So I was, please, go ahead.
Since you need a woman. Hi, my name is Pune Gadusi. I'm with the BBC. You talked about educating the potential voters and stopping the apathy that you mentioned. We are preparing programs for education of voters before the elections. What are the specific things you think we could educate the public to be able to carry out a better election?
Thank you. And then in the middle here, yes, you, sir. Please, there's a microphone coming to you.
The name is Bolaji Lewis, the chairman of Nigerian think tank group in UK and worldwide. I've got 2 questions, actually. Honorable Speaker, in view of the enormity of security challenges, why has the National Assembly not looked at state policing, which would have actually boosted the personnel available to secure the umpire and the voting population and others? Then number 2, as you have already elucidated about the requirement for constitutional change for diaspora voting, is it a prerequisite for it to be included in the Electoral Act?
You have a very full menu there to respond to.
Okay, so, yeah.
Please, yeah, stand up. It's
Okay, I'll just try and remember as many of this as I can. Let's start with Dr. Olomo. Good question. Diaspora voting, and we had 58 yes and 240 no's. I don't have the numbers in my head right now, but I believe the numbers that you have quoted because you have a particular interest in it. Well, for constitutional amendments, you require 2/3 majority, and that's 240. But you want me to be open and honest and tell you the truth? Okay. Because sometimes, I like the idea of diaspora voting personally. I really do. It sounds very flowery and very romantic and very nice. But when you come to the practicality of it, which I explained earlier on in my paper, many members actually did a lot of research, and they looked at the numbers of countries in the world, and they juxtaposed that to the numbers of countries that practice overseas balloting. And you'll be surprised, and I don't know if you've done that research. The infinitesimal number, or rather the ratio of countries, including Western, more advanced democracies that refuse to go down that road. The question then became, for many of the parliamentarians, why? If diaspora voting, which we all want, because nobody must be disenfranchised, is so easy, why isn't it being practiced in this place, this place, this place, and that place? Number one. Number two, if truth be told, we're having problems, and that's sort of what I just addressed in my paper. Over the years, we're having problems dealing with elections internally. Now, if we cannot get it right as of yet within the country, what happens outside of the country? I'm just being practical here. Thirdly, the question came up regarding diaspora voting. And as I said, you want the truth. And I'm glad I think the ambassador is here. I've visited many countries, traveled around in my work. And most times the first port of call is the Nigerian embassy. And one of the problems, perhaps the most important issue for them, is the reluctance of Nigerians to register as Nigerians. It's frustrating. They've appealed, they've begged, they've cajoled. But several of our people will not register, for good reason to them. Now, how do you begin to conduct an election, as lovely as it may sound, where you don't even have the data or the database? It's all about the numbers. So we need to address those peripheral but important issues before we can actually get to the meat of the matter. So these are some of the issues that we were confronted with. And like I said, we're trying to dot the I's and cross the T's and see how feasible and how well we can manage these things before we get into the issue of people voting outside of the country. So it's a work in progress, and we need Nigerians to cooperate as well with us. I want to be back here perhaps maybe next year or a couple of years from now, looking forward to the next election and asking the ambassador for the register of Nigerians in in this country and seeing thousands and thousands and thousands and millions, which we have on the register. Now, we don't need to have everybody on the register, but let's have a significant number that we can manage and that can justify whatever logistics and resources that have to be put into it. I think, sorry, I forgot the name, but talked about cybersecurity in voting. That was a major concern in terms of, now, the issue of electronic transmission of votes did not come easy. If you followed the proceedings of the National Assembly very well, the House of Representatives passed it, the Senate did not, or they made amendments to it. Somehow we were able to persuade the Senate to go with our own version, because when you have a discrepancy, you have to go with just one. And they agreed at the end of the day to allow INEC to determine electronic transmission. But the reason why, contrary to a lot of the insinuations out there, why many in the National Assembly were skeptical was exactly that, the issue of cyber security. And the argument was made that there are cyber attacks everywhere. The most fortified institutions, even in military installations, even in America, even in banks. Now, why do we want to compromise our system in a country where we don't even have perhaps the necessary infrastructure or build the walls that are necessary? So that was an argument, and you couldn't poo-poo that argument. Many also argued, when I talk about infrastructure, that there's certain parts of the country, certain remote parts of the country, that are not even covered by network. They do not have the requisite coverage to effect transmission. And then those parts of the country would be disenfranchised. And you must admit to me that one disenfranchised person is enough to mar a process. So those people from that part of the country, and in fact it's widespread, it's not even just one part of the country, we're very reluctant. And if they're working for their people, and that's what you are as a representative, if you represent a certain people, you must make that argument that you don't want your people to be disenfranchised. You see, sometimes elections or sometimes representation is not always a beauty contest. You try as much as possible to do the people's bidding and the will of the people. But there are those times, and when I say the will of the people, I'm talking about out there. But there's sometimes when your inner self tells you, and because you have been reposed with confidence by the people to speak and talk and whatever represent them, you are privy to certain things that they may not be privy to. And you can just make that determination based on your own conscience, and this time based on even representation of the people in the hinterlands, that no, this electronic transmission may not be good for us, it may disenfranchise my people. And that's what informed the difficulty at the time in the issue of transmission. But luckily, we have it now, and we're just now praying that it works. That's all we have now. A prayer that it works. So your concerns were concerns of many Nigerians as well. A lady from BBC talked about how do you educate the voter. Simple. The one line of education for me would be voters need to understand the importance of that one vote that they have. Many people fought for it. Many people died for it. And you don't sell your vote for a mass of pottage and compromise the future of your children. The gratification may be for that moment, but then you have 4 years and perhaps even more to live with whatever the consequences may be. So that's the education. I know in the face of poverty, that may just fall on deaf ears, but we have to continue to ring this to the minds and to the ears of the people of Nigeria. And we would appreciate whatever help we can get from all over the world. I think Bolaji's question, Bolaji Louis, was to do with security, I believe. And what is the National Assembly do, or what is the House doing about it? I'm not quite sure if I remember that correctly. What was the question again?
The question is, in view of the enormity of the security challenges, as it affects voter apathy and every other thing, why has the National Assembly not looked at police, state police,
Okay.
so that we can actually boost the personnel that is available? Because the Nigerian police force is just about 295,000.
Yes. Well, thank you. The House of Representatives has been very proactive up and doing on the issue of security matters. If you follow the House very well, there's not a single day that one member or the other does not come up with issues and motions, and the House comes up with resolutions on the floor of the House. If you remember correctly, there was a time when the House actually summoned the President to come to the House of Representatives to give us a full briefing on what exactly was going on. If you remember correctly, the House held a security summit sometime last year, when for 5 days we collated issues and opinions of stakeholders, from traditional chiefs to experts all over the world. And we came up with recommendations for legislative action, recommendations for executive action. We have implemented some of those bills and we're in the process. But part of it, and there has been growing agitation for state police. Again, we have to bear in mind the society in which we live. Nigeria is a heterogeneous society, multiplicity of states, ethnic groups, and all of that. There are people. I am a state police advocate, but there are people, and we need to always listen to people and hear them, and not just poo-poo their arguments. The people who have argued vehemently against state police, from their experience and from their understanding, that in trying to solve a problem, we'll be creating another problem. When you leave the police and the security machinery in the hands of governors, I don't buy that argument. As much as that argument may be true, when you balance the equities and you look at the two issues, or do I leave state police in the hands of governors and allow them to oppress me and their opponents? I don't want that. But will it reduce the issue of the security threats in my state? I'd rather go with that. I may accept that, yes, governors may use it to their advantage, but in the overall interest of the country, I would rather accept that if the bigger picture is that it deals with the issue of insecurity in Nigeria. So those are the two divides on the issue of state police. But I'm glad to say that even though prior to now, there were more people who were against state police, but I think increasingly it is gaining ground, amongst legislators, and there's a stronger clamor for it. And I agree with you. My argument has always been, if you have state police, of course, the personnel will be recruited from within, and they know their people, and you have it's psychological. You have a motivation, or bigger motivation, to protect your people, as opposed to you're employed from Lagos to police Borno State, or you're employed from Borno State to police Ogun State. Whilst, yes, as a policeman, you will discharge your responsibility as best as you can. But those are strangers to you, where you're going. You don't have family there, you don't have friends there, you don't have relatives there. It gives you less of a motivation to stake your neck out, as opposed to where you're policing your own community. So for me, these are the arguments, and I quite agree with you, Bolaji, on that.
Honourable Speaker, the clock is ticking, and I do want to get some of our virtual audience to ask you some questions.
Great,
too.
and lastly, if I may just very quickly, you don't need to amend the Electoral Act before you get into diaspora voting. The first thing first is the constitutional amendment.
Thank you very much. So the next question is coming from our live stream, and it's Kola Abiola. So can we put Kola through live, please? Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate the Honorable Speaker for his achievements so far. I know you moved from Chicago back to Nigeria and get involved, and from the leader of the minority now to the Speaker of the House. Now, you did a piece of work on the National Security Summit in June 2021, page 63. It is estimated that the Boko Haram has 50 times more ammunition strength than Nigeria armed forces. And I remember you wrote the preface to that report. When you saw that report and how much Boko Haram ammunition they do have, what actually went in your head? One. My quick second question is around the electronic accreditations of voters and transmission. I remember you, all along, you have said so much about infrastructure deficit. When they were passing this law of electronic transmissions of votes and all that, was there any person thinking about the epileptic power supply in the country? Perhaps some of those remote areas don't even have electricity. So what are the plans to tackle such problem in order not to disenfranchise those group of voters from those geographical zones?
Thank you, Kola. Thank you very much. I'm going to read out a couple of questions just so we save time. So we have a question here from Nengak Daniel Gonji, and the question is, the current voter register is an incremental database since 2010. This means that all the registered Nigerians who have died, and there are many, or have migrated since 2010, are still on the voter register. Don't you fear that this mars the credibility of the register? So the question about the registry. And then I have, through the WhatsApp channel, another question here, which is from Ode Friday, who says, 5 gender bills have been rejected so far. What does this reflect for a democratic society and inclusive governance under your leadership? So let's just do those questions, and then we'll come for one more round of questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go straight to caller, and thank you for your very kind words. But I was in Atlanta, not Chicago. The home of the Braves. For those of you who follow the Braves, baseball. Boko Haram, you alluded to a report many years ago. And yes, one of the things that jumped at you and jumped at us and jumped at me as well was the sophistication and the sophisticated equipment and personnel that these guys had. And the first thing that tells you is that there's more to it than meets the eye. That this is something, and there has been talk to this effect, which I sometimes hesitate to mention, but mention I must, that perhaps there's some level of international involvement or conspiracy in this whole matter. Now, where are these guys getting their funding? Where are these guys getting their equipment? And more so, many in those parts will tell you that if you go to perhaps, say, Maiduguri or Borno State, you cannot get a place to rent. You cannot get an apartment. You cannot get a hotel room. And the question then becomes, because they've been rented by, whether it's Red Cross or the international, all rented, and rented for 10 years. And that made a lot of people, including security officers, wonder, do you know something that we do not know? Why is there no, why are you paying rent for 10 years from now? Are you hoping that this goes on for another 10 years? So these are things, and I'm not affirming any of these things. This is just suggestions and things that have been said. Secondly, yes, they have more equipment and more personnel, whatever you may want to call it. And we've often wondered, the problem is Nigeria can only get its arms and ammunition from certain countries, principally United States. Now, United States has a couple of laws, the Leahy Act and something else I forget now, wherein they preclude Nigeria from buying arms from them. And the reason, or it's under the guise that they go to your human rights records and say, because of your human rights records, we cannot sell arms to you. But yet these are the same countries that come down hard on you on your security challenges. And then we must ask ourselves, why would you, on one hand, talk about human rights records? I'm not saying whether we have the best of records, but why would you hide under that and not sell arms? How do you want us to deal with the issue of terror? How? With stones and mortars? With sticks? But what's still is that when Nigeria now reaches out to other countries, and you don't buy arms off the shelf. When you reach out to other countries, the Leahy Act has a way of roping them in. And then there becomes a problem between the United States and that country. So we're caught in a very difficult situation. On the one hand, you talk about human rights records. On the other hand, you also don't supply us with what we need, the necessary tools to deal with the situation at hand. Talk about mercenaries, or whatever name you want to call them, contractors. Yes, that was part of the recommendations in the Security Summit. And again, there are two schools of thought. So while some of us think that, look, you don't do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, let's farm this thing out. But there are those who also are more conservative than us and believe that, no, you cannot, it compromises the territorial integrity of the country. So that is the problem, and it's a tug of war, and hopefully the wiser counsel will prevail one way or the other. I believe in hiring people to come and do the job for whatever, however we want to do it. It's a job that must be done, and there are various ways to skin the cat. If it's not working one way, you got to try other alternatives. On the issue of electronic transmission, epileptic power supply, I think I spoke to that in my paper when I was talking about infrastructure and why a lot of people argued against electronic transmission just for that very reason. There's no network coverage, the electrical supply is epileptic. But I think this is one time, and I must say, and that's why I said sometimes it's not a beauty contest. Representation is not a beauty, being a representative is not a beauty. You're not out to win a beauty contest. But I think this is one time the National Assembly yielded to public pressure and said, okay, you know what, let's do it and see what happens. So many fought against electronic transmission, not because it was not a good thing, but because we were not ready yet. On the issue, and I think Daniel talked about voter registration and ghost voters, and that some people died and some people, yeah, of course. Voter registration is a continuous thing, and the register is updated by INEC. We have a committee at the House and in the Senate that supervises and oversees INEC, and they make sure and they are up to speed, and it's a good question, and we'll make sure that we tighten all the screws and that we weed out dead, lost, and those in diaspora. That was a joke. Those in diaspora who live in diaspora but are registered in Nigeria can come home to vote.
And you had the other question was from Ode Friday on the 5 gender bills. So
yes, 5 gender bills. Yes, of course. That's another hot button issue in Nigeria today. And I mean, we all know what happened. And there was overwhelming vote against those gender bills. But I don't even know how much overwhelming. Coming from where we're coming from, and looking at our tradition, we're steeped into our tradition and our culture. We have to take that. It has to be contextual. What is the tradition in Nigeria? What is I talked about being a heterogeneous society. What are the religious beliefs? You cannot overnight wish those things away. It's baby steps that we're taking. And at this point, what I did was, if you look at the votes, and I don't know if you have the same numbers that you had for the overseas balloting, but if you look at the votes in a lot of those bills, somewhere, amazingly, coming from where we're coming from, in the high numbers, but we just couldn't make the threshold of 240, which was required. Yeah. But what I did, along with my colleagues, was to call back after about 2-3 weeks, call back which is a legislative process. We called back the House and rescinded our decision on those bills. And right now, but for the fact that we're on recess for different reasons, that would have been brought back. And I did promise that we'll bring that back for voting again. But let me be very clear. I believe and I hope that we'll pass at least 3 or 4 of those bills. But one thing I wouldn't hold my breath on, and I have to be very honest with you, is the issue of special seats. Mm. And I'm going to be very honest, because special seats, when you talk about having 35% seats allocated to women, and you call them special seats, the numbers came to about 111 in the House of Representatives, 111 seats off the bat. And then the remainder, about 200 seats or thereabouts, will also be contested by women. So for a lot of men, and some women, they thought it was a little bit, was a bit of an overreach. And then there were issues on how do you identify those seats? How do you identify where are you going to take those special seats from? Whose constituency are you going to take those? So there's so many issues. And again, a lot of these things sound nice, like music to the ear, but when you look at it, when you drill down and look at it for what it is, some of it is just not practical. So I think if we do 3, 4 out of 5, I think we haven't done too bad. Like I said, it'll be baby steps, little by little, until we reach El Dorado. For now, I'm not sure about the special seats for women. Right.
I'm going to take a couple more questions and then we finish from the room. So the lady there's been very patient. Thank you very much. And I know there's one question there. So this is the last round. My apologies for all of you that were live streamed. We have probably over 60 questions. We'll summarize them and pass them on to Honourable Speaker so he understands where they haven't been asked. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ndidi Njoku, Principal Director of Markets for Development. Thank you very much for the discussion. It's very good to have these types of discussions leading up to the Nigerian election. So it would be great to understand the work being done in Nigeria to strengthen the rule of law in the electoral process. I'm speaking specifically about the previous elections in Imo State, which went all the way to the Supreme Court with a judgment that the candidates who I believe came fourth should be the next governor of Imo State, which I'm sure you would agree with me has led to a plethora of issues, both within the state, but also including the issue of voter apathy. Strengthening the independence of the judicial system to uphold the rights of voters and promote the rule of law has implications not just for the electoral process, but also for areas such as investment into Nigeria. So I'll be happy to kind of hear your views on that perspective.
Thank you very much. I had a number of questions from private sector. I won't name them here right now, but they were asking a question slightly differently, which was about the institution of the National Assembly and your role. So they're saying that basically, in summary, they're saying various House committee investigations have ramped up increasingly doing investigations on private market operators in critical growth sectors of the economy. These investigations attract a lot of press, both locally and internationally, and sometimes the investigations obviously are huge and come up with credible hard data, sometimes erroneous. The point they're saying is there seems to be a growth area which their investors themselves start to worry about that. And the question is, what are you doing as Speaker of the House to try and manage that growth area at the moment in terms of investigating private investments into Nigeria? So that slightly ties into the private sector thing. And I know there's a question here. Could we get the microphone over? And we'll take one more after that, and then that's it. Yeah.
I'll stand up.
Please
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Paul Arkwright. I was the UK High Commissioner to Nigeria until 2018. I'm now a private consultant. One comment and one question very quickly. The comment is on the gender bill. I'm very pleased to hear what you said about them, the possibility of them being rescinded and having another look at them. I was one of many people who support Nigeria who was frankly dismayed and depressed by the outcome of the vote in the National Assembly on the gender bill, and I think that's done quite a bit of damage, frankly, to Nigeria's reputation overseas. My question goes back to what you were saying about money. You talked about the cost of nomination forms, and the importance of regulating campaign financing. I'd be interested to know what is being done about that. And while vote rigging and ballot stuffing and all of the bad practices of earlier times have perhaps diminished, if not disappeared, one thing that has not disappeared is vote buying, what's called voter inducement in Nigeria. I have witnessed vote buying myself in gubernatorial elections in Nigeria, and I'd be interested to know what exactly the House, the National Assembly, is doing to tackle what is an endemic problem, in my view. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've run out of time. I'm looking at the clock here, so my apologies. But Honourable Speaker, a few questions left for you to answer.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Njoku. Let me say, I totally agree with you. The rule of law is a sine qua non for good governance anywhere, any part of the world. And the issue you bring up on the issue of the judiciary, I don't think we should, because we begin to run into murky waters if we second guess the judiciary and try to impute motives into what they do. That is, I'm not even giving them a clean bill of health, but I'm just saying it's a slippery slope. that we don't want to go into. If at the end of the day, somebody who came forth is declared the winner of an election, well, good luck to him. The question is, does he have a mandate? Now, you may be declared legally based on legal intricacies and the rule of law, which you have mentioned. But in terms of your moral justification to lead, it now becomes something for you to determine whether or not you have the people's mandate. And does it make it easier for you to govern or not? I don't want to walk down that road, even though I absolutely understand what you're saying in terms of the judiciary. But even in the most advanced democracies, you're aware that even again, I keep referring to my friends in America. I hope they don't come down hard on me. But even in the United States, we've had decisions or elections that have been handed over to some people who the people do not believe won the election. And case in point, again, I keep referring, I said earlier, it was the Gore versus Bush and the issue of the hanging charge, which is very fresh in all our memories. But I hear you and I feel you. And hopefully, in terms of independence of the judiciary, this is why years ago we put the judiciary on the first line charge. Many have advocated and have argued that maybe judges should be elected as well, as is done in the United States. Maybe that may be the panacea, I don't know. But again, this is a work in progress. On the issue of investigations and resistance by private investors, again, that is something we need to look at very seriously. I cannot stand here and tell you that, or whoever tell you that because you're a private investor, you are outside the ambit of the law or the jurisdiction of the National Assembly or the legislature. And I don't think you are in other countries. So Nigeria cannot be a dumping ground for people to practice all sorts of possibly nefarious activities that they would not engage in wherever they may be coming from. If you abide by the law and you stick by the compliance rules, you have nothing to worry about. Now, the Constitution actually gives the National Assembly authority, because it talks in Section 88 and Section 89. It talks about gives you the power to investigate anyone. The language is anybody. It doesn't talk about private or public. So there will be investigations where people have, and sometimes investigations they work for the best for the private investigators, private investors, because sometimes these investigations are based on petitions, and sometimes those petitions may be frivolous, and therefore, when it works out that you will investigate, and we find out that no, this is frivolous, and you get a clean bill of health, and you continue with your business. It's almost akin, a private investor saying he should not be investigated is almost akin to saying, I cannot be sued. I cannot be tried in a court of law in Nigeria because I'm a private investor. And I'm not sure that any country would accept that position. Paul talked about the cost of nomination forms and what are we doing about the high cost of elections. Now, let's face it, Paul. Anywhere in the world, elections are expensive. Again, I go back to America. Millions and millions and millions, unheard of dollars are spent on elections in America. Now, the difference is this, and I quite agree. Those things, elections in America, the cost of elections in America is used for logistics. Adverts, TV adverts, one minute advert can cost you millions of dollars. But whereas in Nigeria, it's an exchange. So I understand that. So on that premise, cost of elections are the same, if not less in Nigeria, but the purpose to which they're used is where the difference is, and we need to deal with that. And what have we done? I believe there are provisions in the electoral law that criminalize a lot of these things. So the law is there. The question is it being implemented or executed? And that's what we need to. And there's an electoral offences law that hopefully will reach the stage of passage and signature into law by Mr. President very soon. Voter buying, the bane of our society. But I think the people, like we said earlier, we need to educate. We need to educate. But in the face of poverty and all of that, how much education can you? But we just need to keep trying. Need to keep pushing. For like they say, for every thesis and antithesis, there's a synthesis. What is the reason for the voter buying? Mostly because of poverty. That is the thesis, the antithesis, and what do you get? Synthesis is a corrupt system, a corrupt electoral process. And so we're working hard at it. We're working hard at it, and I share your concerns. Let me say, self-serving it may sound, I don't buy votes.
And on that note, I want to thank the Right Honourable Femi for having spent the last hour and 15 minutes with us. My apologies, we overran slightly, but this was a rich and important discussion. I think there's some promotional materials about...
Yes, I took the liberty of bringing the legislative agenda of the Ninth Assembly.
Afterwards, please take one of those away. Yeah. I also want to invite you back after the elections. In 2015, after the elections, Professor Jagger decided to retire, but he came to Chatham House and then talked about his own experiences, including of those elections. So you may not want to retire, but you may come back. And I know that you have a Nigerian High Commissioner who will be very anxious to talk to you. You already said you were coming back for that reason. So good luck with the elections. We will be, as I said, following them closely at Chatham House. There'll be a number of other presentations and discussions here. And the final thing is just let's show our courtesy appreciation of the Right Honourable Speaker. Thank you for coming to Chatham House.
Thank you.